So the Department of Justice has released hundreds of thousands of documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein in accordance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But not all the files were released, and the ones that were came with heavy redactions, leading to outrage and even threats of legal action.
Congressman Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, the primary sponsors of the Epstein bill, both slammed the release of the files over the weekend. They say what the DOJ did is not in compliance with their bill, which President Trump signed into law 1 month ago. Here was Ro Khanna on Friday.
They released one document from a New York grand jury of 119 pages, totally blacked out. This despite a federal judge ordering them to release that document. And our law requires them to explain redactions. There's not a single explanation for why that entire document was redacted. We have not seen the draft indictment that implicates other rich and powerful men who were on Epstein's rape island, who either watched the abuse of young girls or participated in the abuse of young girls and the sex trafficking.
Khanna and Massie have suggested that impeachment charges should be drafted against Attorney General Pam Bondi for her handling of the files. As the backlash to release the files grew over the weekend, the DOJ put out its own response to address these redactions. It says, quote, "The Department of Justice is committed to transparency and redacting only what is legally required. The department is required by law to redact information about the victims, minors, or potential victims, as well as privileged materials. No redactions have been or will be made to protect famous individuals or politically exposed persons."
Of the files that were released, former President Bill Clinton was seen in many of them. Clinton was pictured with Epstein, as well as some major celebrities like Michael Jackson and Mick Jagger. But there was also controversy after at least 16 photos disappeared from the DOJ's website on Saturday, including one showing a photograph of President Trump. It fueled speculation online, with some suggesting that the pictures were removed from the website as part of a cover-up. But Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche called those theories laughable and said the pictures had to be removed because of concerns raised by potential victims.
Meanwhile, the New York Times published an article the same day the files were released. It claims that a woman who used to work for Epstein filed a complaint with the FBI nearly 30 years ago, accusing him of having interest in child pornography. It says the woman, Maria Farmer, has for years said that she had called federal investigators in the summer of 1996, but the FBI had never publicly acknowledged her original report, even to Ms. Farmer. Some people following the Epstein case had accused her of inventing the story. After the release of thousands of Epstein files on Friday, the New York Times contacted Ms. Farmer about a report stamped with the date of September 3rd, 1996. She broke down in tears. I've waited 30 years, she said. I can't believe it. They can't call me a liar anymore.
Wow, that's crazy, her story.
That was, and I saw that story over the weekend. As you know, these headlines came in, it was hard to follow, like, you know, every day there was something new.
Right.
And there's a lot here. But that story really stuck out to me because I'm like, the biggest question that's still not answered is, how was Epstein able to get away with this for so long? And as much as it's become a spectacle, and there's merit to the conversation about how and why people are interested in it right now, there still are victims here and people that really want answers. And a lot of this was just volume, this last release, rather than transparency. I don't think a lot of questions were asked. There's a lot of weird stuff that we can point out about what's going on, from redacting President Trump's name when he's a political leader and not anybody that's a victim, or the pictures that have disappeared. One of them, I think, included President Trump that's now back. I think that maybe there is some kind of engagement of trying to protect Trump in any way, even though he knows that his name is in there and said release everything. But they're still like, they don't want it to be the main conversation around President Trump. But, you know, instead of just like allowing the smoke to fester in what people are seeing as a fire, it might be better to just release some of the interviews, like the FBI interviews with victims, that might paint the picture about what happened, even by canceling out the victims' names and just telling people what was said so people can understand more about how this went on for so long. That's the biggest question for me, is like, how can we never have anything like this go on for years or even days again, especially if people for 30 years have been trying to tell the FBI to please look at this man.
Yeah, and this is the latest in a long line of perceived FBI failures, whether it's the mass shooters who get reported to the FBI prior to them committing an act, and the FBI failed to follow up on those tips, or the Larry Nassar case and now the Epstein case, getting away with it for over a decade before his first indictment, which ended up he got a sweetheart plea deal out of that and ended up being able to continue his activity for another decade after that, if not longer. And so perhaps it's an FBI cover-up of its own bad behavior. But I do think the steady drip, drip, drip of the release, as opposed to dropping everything at once, the way that the administration promised at the beginning of the admin, instead of waiting until now, forcing Congress to pass this bill, it just gives the impression that they are trying to hide something. And so just from a political strategy or a communication strategy standpoint, dumping everything at once and having as few redactions as possible and explaining the redactions that are there allows this to have people are able to analyze the files, and then everybody can move on, right? But instead they've decided to drag this out. They've been playing political games with it, and it just gives people a bad impression.
And I'll say, like, when they first got released, I thought maybe it was everything because there was so much. But when you see like Congress people posting on Instagram and X different full black pages and full, pages that had black every other line,
right?
It kind of almost felt like a mockery of, because I understand the argument about protecting victims and any children that were in the photos, obviously. But when you start to see like endless, it's just like there's going to be questions about how much needed to be redacted. And then something that Thomas Massey keeps saying is, you have to explain the redaction. So if somebody's calling for an explanation, or if the American public wants to know what was here or what was there, and what are the laws that protecting it to make it stay redacted, and that's not being thoroughly explained, then people are kind of left in limbo to keep making up stories in their head about what could possibly be there. And I think that that's part of the issue, is that we've been having this conversation for a year now, where if everything was released almost over the weekend, I was like, wow, this is a lot. Everybody got what they wanted. And as I started going through it, I'm like, oh no, everybody didn't get everything. And I think that's what the American public keeps feeling time and time again as they keep piecemealing parts of this out. Just answer the question. I think that even our highest government officials should want to know, aside from Bill Clinton looking gross, because it did look gross, and that it's like, who else was working in coordination? Like, is there an implication for Bill Clinton? Then he should be implicated if that's what the allegation is. I don't want to see any more pictures of him in the hot tub. Like, I want to know, who helped this man continue on with these heinous acts for so many years. And that's the biggest thing that's frustrating, is that it's becoming more of a headline grabber and, this attention-seeking thing, when it really should be just information so this never happens again.
Yeah, exactly. And the bill that was passed by Congress, as Ro Khanna was explaining, does require them to explain the redactions, which they did not do. They did not provide an explanation for each redaction, which only raises further questions and speculation about what could be in the documents. The New York Times published a story last week about trying to explain how Jeffrey Epstein got as wealthy as he did.
I saw that.
Yeah, and they were like, well, basically, he was just really good at convincing rich people to give them his money. I don't know who believes that, right? Like, everybody assumes
and it was a long article
right?
to get to that conclusion.
I know. And so it just seems like every release just whets the appetite more, I guess, for real answers.
Yeah.
All right, coming up, a mock funeral held for the penny, the coin, brought hundreds to the Lincoln Memorial this weekend. We'll tell you about it next.